I knew something was off the moment 3 black SUVs rolled up to my ranch gate at sundown. There's a certain way vehicles move when people are just lost, or maybe curious about directions. They slow, hesitate, take in the lay of the land. These didn't. They rolled in like they owned the dirt road, dust pluming behind them, engines humming with that practiced steadiness that told me the drivers had rehearsed this. The sun had just dipped low enough to turn the sky molten orange, that dangerous time when shadows stretch long and you can't quite tell if something is real or imagined. Out here, 10 miles past the last gas station, every little detail matters. The stillness of the air, the sound of cicadas droning, even the way birds go quiet when strangers come around. I'd lived long enough on this land to know when something didn't fit. And this, 3 SUVs, tinted windows, arriving in formation, didn't fit. The doors opened almost in sync, too tight, too deliberate. A handful of men stepped out. At first glance, they looked official, or at least they wanted me to believe they were. Tactical vests clung awkwardly to their bodies like Halloween, costumes 2 sizes too big. On each chest was a patch stitched on with thread that caught the dying light. HOA enforcement. It was almost funny. Almost. Out here, surrounded by nothing but dry brush, barbed wire fences, and the occasional coyote, the concept of a homeowners association was a joke. I didn't live in a cul-de-sac with freshly mowed lawns and neighborly bake sales. I lived on a spread of wild land, where the closest neighbor was a rancher 5 miles east who preferred his own company and didn't take kindly to visitors. There was no HOA. There had never been one. The leader, if you could call him that, carried himself like he'd watched too many cop dramas. His boots were too clean, no dirt on them, no creases from real use. He had a buzz cut that looked fresh, but his jawline twitched when he scanned my property. A real professional never lets the eyes betray the nerves. His tone was clipped when he barked. "We've had complaints. This property needs inspection." I studied his stance, feet apart, hands resting near his belt where a sidearm might be, except it wasn't a service pistol. I could tell from 30 feet out. It was a civilian model, and not even holstered properly. His vest bulged awkwardly, like he'd shoved a radio or maybe a flask under it. The rest of his crew tried to mirror him, but they were worse. One guy's vest wasn't even strapped all the way down, the Velcro peeling with every step. Another had a patch sewn on crooked, the letters HOA tilting to the side as if mocking him. These men weren't officials. They were actors in a bad play, stumbling through lines they didn't understand. I leaned on the fence post, feigning nonchalance, though my senses sharpened the way they always did when danger crept near. "Inspection?" I repeated, drawing out the word. "Sure, I wasn't aware the HOA made it all the way out here." My tone was mild, almost curious, but inside my instincts screamed. Back in the teams, we learned to read a battlefield before a single shot was fired. This wasn't Afghanistan, but the signs were the same. The stiffness of men trying to act natural, the way they scanned the property not for weeds or trash but for entry points, exits, blind spots. They weren't looking to enforce rules. They were casing the place. The leader squared his shoulders, probably proud that I hadn't laughed him off outright. "We've had multiple complaints from your neighbors," he said. "Unkempt property, violations of code, possible unauthorized structures." He gestured vaguely at my barn. "We'll need to take a look around." I almost smirked. Unauthorized structures? My barn had been standing longer than half the state highways around here, but I didn't. I kept my face steady, eyes calm. Let them think they had me fooled. That's the thing most men like this don't understand. You never show your hand. Too early. If you do, you give them control of the game. The guy with the crooked patch shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. He kept glancing at the barn, then at the house, then at me. His fingers twitched like he wanted to scratch his arm but didn't dare move. He was green, too green for whatever they thought they were doing. The other one, the tall one with the half-open vest, rested a hand on his hip, trying to look relaxed. But the bulge under his shirt wasn't a radio or a flask. It was the outline of a blade strapped tight. Poorly hidden, easy to spot if you knew what to look for. And I always knew what to look for. My dog, Ranger, a shepherd mix with more scars than I could count, padded up beside me. He didn't bark, he didn't growl. He just stood there, ears back, reading the men like I was. Animals know. They always know. One of the men shifted back half a step when he saw Ranger's eyes locked. "On him? You boys from around here?" I asked casually, scratching behind Ranger's ear. My voice was smooth, easy, but inside I was mapping every angle of the situation. Distance from the gate to the barn, 20 yards, SUV formation, 3 across, blocking the road. My rifle. Inside, propped near the door, too far to grab without tipping my hand. Sidearm. Under my jacket, loaded, safety on. Close enough if things turned fast. The leader gave me a stiff nod. "We're with the regional HOA task force." His lie rolled out practiced, but the tremor in his lip betrayed him. Task force. That was a new one. I had to give them credit. For creativity. "Regional, huh?" I said, letting the word hang. "Funny. I've lived here going on 8 years. Never heard of a regional task force for a homeowners association. I suppose you got ID to back that up." For the first time, the leader hesitated. Just a flicker, but enough. He reached into his vest pocket, pulled out a laminated card, and flashed it quick like a magician's trick. Too quick. The lamination gleamed, but I caught the edge of a frayed cut, uneven scissors job at best. He shoved it back into his pocket. Before I could say a word. "That'll do," I said, though my voice carried just enough edge to make him wonder what I really meant. Ranger let out a low whine, barely audible. The men shifted again. The tall one glanced at the gate, then back at his SUV, like he was already thinking about retreat. The leader stiffened, trying to hold it together, but his crew was cracking at the seams. Inside my head, a different voice spoke. The old voice, the one trained into me years ago in Coronado, in mud, in surf, in nights where the only thing keeping us alive was awareness and grit. This is not a random visit. This is a probe. They want to see if you're weak, if you'll fold. If you do, they'll come back worse. If you don't, you set the tone right now. I shifted my weight, giving the appearance of ease, though every muscle was coiled tight. My hand brushed the fence post, tapping lightly, signaling Ranger in a rhythm he knew. He didn't move, but his body tensed, waiting for my cue. The leader stepped closer, his boots crunching on gravel. "Sir, if you cooperate, this will go smoothly. We're just here to ensure compliance." Compliance. That word. I'd heard it before, halfway around the world, shouted in a dozen languages by men who thought power came from a uniform or a patch. But real authority isn't sewn on crooked or printed on laminated cards. It's in the steadiness of your eyes, in the way you stand when someone tries to push you off your ground. I let a slow smile spread across my face. Not friendly, not hostile, just enough to make him wonder. "Sure, fellas," I said, voice calm as the dying light. "Come on in," and just like that, the trap snapped shut, not on me, but on them. I played dumb. "Inspection." "Sure, fellas, come on in." The words slipped out smooth, almost casual, but behind my calm exterior, my pulse slowed the way it always did before things got dangerous. It's funny how that works. Most people's hearts race when adrenaline kicks in. Mine drops into a steady rhythm, like my body knows it's time to get to work. Years of training beat panic out of me and replaced it with cold focus. They bought the act too. The leader nodded like he'd just won a small victory. His crew exchanged quick glances, their nerves softening, mistaking my hospitality for surrender. They stepped through the gate one by one, boots crunching against gravel, trying to look like they belonged. But I could see the cracks in their performance clearer than daylight. The tall one with the knife under his vest couldn't stop adjusting. It as if he thought he was hiding the fact that it was digging into his ribs. The younger one, The one with the crooked patch kept darting glances toward the barn, eyes twitching, breath quickening. While they strutted around pretending to check fence posts, I peeled away from the front of the property with the same casual air of a man giving space. "Check whatever you need," I said, tipping my hat like some old rancher just trying to be agreeable. "Won't stop you." But the moment I stepped past the edge of the barn, my whole body switched gears. This wasn't a conversation anymore. It was an operation. The distance from them to me stretched into a tactical map. Every angle of the barn became cover, every beam of fading sunlight a shadow to exploit. The dirt beneath my boots muffled sound better than any padded floor back in Bud-S training. I slipped into the shadows, every movement precise, every breath measured. My mind reached back to every house raid, every recon op where silence and patience meant the difference between breathing and bleeding. These men thought they were predators, but they had no idea they'd wandered into a hunting ground, and I was the one who wrote the rules here. Inside the barn, the smell of hay, oil and old wood wrapped around me, familiar and grounding. Against the far wall, exactly where I'd left it, was my suppressed AR-15, cleaned just 2 nights ago, magazine loaded, safety on. I picked it up like a man greeting an old friend. My hands knew the weight, the balance, the way it settled against my shoulder. I didn't even need to think. My muscles had fired this rifle thousands of times in conditions far worse than this. I slid the suppressor into place, the threads locking with a soft click that only I could hear. My night vision goggles hung from a peg, and I slipped them down over my eyes, adjusting the strap until the world turned to green-lit clarity. Outside, those imposters moved like blundering cattle, unaware that to me they now glowed in sharp detail against the encroaching darkness. The leader tried to look official as he motioned to one of his men. "Check that structure," he ordered, nodding at my barn. His voice was clipped, almost eager, like he thought he was in control. I leaned against the stall door inside, silent as the grave, rifle raised. Through the goggles, I saw the young one approach cautiously, hand hovering near his hip, not brave enough to actually draw his weapon. He reached for the lock on the barn, tugging it, testing its strength. His lips moved as he muttered something under his breath, probably a curse. Then the leader himself stepped up, pulling a pair of bolt cutters from his vest. He gripped them with both hands, jaw tightening, and lined them up with my lock. That was it. The line crossed. You don't cut a man's lock in the middle of nowhere unless you mean to take what's his. And nobody takes what's mine. From the shadows, I whispered, low and steady. Bad move. The sound cut through the night, sharper than a blade. All 3 men froze, their bodies stiffening at once. The leader's hands tightened on the bolt cutters, then faltered. His head snapped toward the barn's dark mouth, eyes straining to pierce what he couldn't see. "Who's there?" he demanded, but his voice cracked on the last word. I didn't answer. Instead, I shifted 1 step to the left, letting my boots scrape just enough against the dirt to give him a second sound, a second ghost in the dark. He spun, swinging the bolt cutters like a weapon now, his crew fumbling for theirs. Too slow, too green. I moved. The rifle pressed tight into my shoulder. I slipped from the barn like a shadow, circling around the side. Night vision turned their hesitation into opportunity. The tall one finally unsheathed his blade, but his hands shook, the steel flashing clumsy in the dim. The younger one tried to pull his pistol, but it snagged in his vest strap, fumbling, useless. The leader barked, "Spread out!" but his voice betrayed panic more than command. I was already behind him. With a swift motion, I swung the rifle stock into the back of his knee. His leg buckled and he collapsed to the dirt, the bolt cutters falling from his grip with a dull thud. Before he could shout, I pressed the muzzle to the base of his skull, just enough for him to feel the cold steel. "Hands where I can see." "Them," I said, voice calm, measured, not loud. The other 2 froze, their bravado evaporating in an instant. The tall one dropped his knife like it had burned him. The young one finally yanked his pistol free, but the moment his shaking hands pointed it anywhere near me, Ranger came tearing from the house like a bullet. My dog slammed into him with all 80 pounds of muscle and scars, knocking him flat on his back, weapon flying from his grip. Ranger's teeth bared inches from the kid's throat, a growl vibrating low and steady. The tall one raised his hands, eyes darting. We don't want trouble, man." His voice cracked like a teenager's. "You brought trouble," I said, my focus still on the leader pinned beneath me. I zip-tied his wrists behind his back with one smooth motion, the plastic biting into his skin. He tried to thrash, but I leaned in, voice so close to his ear he could feel my breath. "You thought you were hunting, but you walked into the wrong pasture." I spun, rifle trained on the tall one. "On your knees." He dropped so fast his knees hit gravel, hands trembling above his head. I moved quick, closing the distance, pulling another set of ties from my pocket. Years of muscle memory made it seamless. I bound his wrists in seconds, then shoved him face down in the dirt beside his boss. The younger one whimpered beneath Ranger, who still held position, teeth bared. "Call him off! Please, man, please!" I crouched low, snatched the pistol from the ground, and shoved it into my waistband. "Stay still, and maybe he doesn't rip your throat out." Ranger growled louder, and the kid went limp, tears shining in his eyes. I tied him up too, wrists tight, ankles bound for good measure. In less than 3 minutes, the whole crew was disarmed, zip-tied and face down in my dirt. Their SUVs still idled at the gate, headlights glaring into the night like blind eyes. Stood over them, rifle lowered but ready, breathing steady. The leader tried to turn his head toward me, his cheek pressed against gravel. You don't know who you're messing with." His voice strained, desperate. I crouched beside him, tilting my head. "Wrong. I know exactly who I'm messing with. Fake badges, cheap gear, stolen patches. You're not law. You're not even close. You're thieves. And you made the worst mistake of your lives picking my ranch." His eyes flared, but he stayed silent. Ranger circled them slowly, nose low, tail stiff, like he was deciding which one to tear into first. The young one sobbed quietly. The tall one muttered prayers under his breath. The leader clenched his jaw, but I could see the fear pooling in his eyes, the realization settling heavy in his gut. Out here, there's no HOA. There's no backup, no patrol car around the corner. Out here, there's only land, sky, and the law a man makes for himself. And tonight, my law had spoken. Turns out they weren't HOA cops at all. They were a band of thieves running a racket on isolated properties, dressing like wannabe enforcers to scare folks into compliance. Not the smartest plan in the world, but I had to admit, it was clever enough to fool someone without training. Show up in black SUVs, throw on tactical vests with some patches, bark orders in a tone that mimicked authority. Most folks would fold. Most folks would let them inspect their property, and by the time they realized what was really happening, they'd be robbed blind. But tonight, they didn't knock on most folks' door. They walked into mine. I paced the dirt while they lay bound on my porch, their wrists zip-tied tight, ankles locked together. Ranger sat at my feet, ears sharp, eyes never leaving the men. Every now and then, he let out a low growl, the kind that vibrates from deep inside his chest and reminds you he isn't some house pet. He's a soldier's dog, trained to sense fear, trained to protect. The leader, flat on his side, glared up at me with a mix of hate and humiliation. His cheek was scraped raw from the gravel, blood crusting at the edge of his lip. "You don't understand what you've done," he spat, words muffled by dirt. I crouched beside him, arms resting on my knees. "No," I said calmly. "I understand it perfectly. You thought you could roll up here and play dress-up cop, and I was supposed to fall in line. You thought fear would get you in my barn, my house, My life. What you didn't understand. I leaned in close, so he could feel the weight of every word. Is that fear doesn't work on me? The tall one groaned, wrists raw from straining against the ties. Please, man, just let us go. We won't come back. We were just what? I snapped, eyes cutting to him. Just trespassing? Just impersonating law enforcement? Just about to break into my barn and strip me of whatever you could carry? That what you call just? His mouth snapped shut, eyes dropping to the porch wood beneath his face. He had no answer, because there wasn't one. The youngest of the crew, the kid with the crooked patch, sniffled quietly, his whole body trembling. He wasn't built for this life. That much was clear. His breathing was erratic, lips moving like he was muttering prayers. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But pity doesn't erase intent, and intent brought him here tonight, alongside the others. The night air was sharp now, the heat of the day bleeding away into a chill that bit through thin shirts. Out here, night can be brutal in its silence. Every sound carries, the shuffle of a bound man trying to get comfortable, the distant call of an owl, the hum of my porch light buzzing over our little standoff. I leaned against the railing, rifle, cradled in my arms, and thought about what came next. Part of me considered calling it in right away. But another part, the darker part, the one that had learned overseas what justice sometimes really looks like, wondered if it was better to make them stew. Fear is a teacher sharper than any blade. Finally, I pulled my phone from my pocket, dialed the sheriff's office. When the dispatcher picked up, I kept it simple. Got 3 men impersonating officers, attempted forced entry on my property. They're restrained and waiting for pickup. There was a pause. Then the dispatcher asked slowly, "Restrained?" I glanced at the hog-tied crew on my porch. "Yes, ma'am, restrained." She hesitated again before replying. "Understood. Deputy will be out shortly. Sit tight." The leader heard every word. His jaw tightened, and he let out a bitter laugh. "Think the law's gonna thank you for this? Think they won't ask why you've got us tied up like cattle?" I crouched again, tilting my head at him. "You worried about how you look right now? Because from where I stand, you don't look like much at all. You came here with bolt cutters, weapons, lies, and you got beat by a rancher and his dog." I let the words settle, quiet but sharp as barbed wire. "That's the story they'll hear, and you'll be lucky if they don't tack on a dozen more charges for your little act." Minutes stretched. 10, 20. The 3 of them squirmed on the porch, bound tight, their bravado bleeding out of them with every passing second. The kid whimpered every time Ranger growled low. The tall one's prayers turned into muttered curses. The leader stayed silent now, but his eyes burned holes into me, rage festering with no place to go. Headlights finally appeared down the long dirt road, cutting through the black. A single sheriff's cruiser, dust trailing behind it. Relief flickered across the kid's face. Resignation etched into the tall one's. The leader, though, his jaw clenched tighter. He wasn't relieved. He wasn't resigned. He was calculating. The cruiser rolled to a stop, tires crunching gravel. Out stepped Deputy Harris, a man I'd known for years. Solid, middle-aged, with the tired eyes of someone who's seen too many long nights. His hand hovered near his holster as he took in the scene. 3 men zip-tied on my porch, me standing calm with a rifle slung across my chest, Ranger planted like a sentry at my side. "Evening," Harris said, voice careful. "Heard you've had some visitors." "You could say that," I replied evenly. "They came dressed as HOA enforcement, claimed they had a right to inspect my property. Tried cutting my lock. That's when I stepped in." Harris approached slowly, eyes scanning the bound men. He shook his head, a disbelieving chuckle escaping. "HOA cops. That's a new one." He crouched, inspected the patches, the cheap gear the bolt cutter still lying in the dirt. Then he looked at me. Guess they picked the wrong ranch. I gave the faintest smile. Guess so. Harris radioed for backup, his tone clipped but calm. As he waited, he studied the men again. Seen these boys before. Heard rumors about a crew running cons out near the county line. Folks too scared to question authority, handing over cash, goods, whatever they asked for. Thought it was just talk. He shook his head. Looks like the talk was real. The leader tried to sit up, his bound wrists jerking. This is unlawful restraint. He can't just... Shut it, Harris snapped, voice cutting sharp. You're lucky you're still breathing. Man says you tried cutting his lock. That's attempted burglary, impersonating an officer, criminal trespass. Hell, I'll let the DA sort the rest. Backup arrived, another cruiser, then another. Soon the night filled with red and blue strobes, radios crackling, boots thudding against dirt. The thieves were hauled to their feet one by one, their protests drowned out by orders barked from deputies who weren't in the mood for games. I stood back, rifle slung, arms crossed, watching it all. The kid cried as they shoved him into the back of a cruiser. The tall one cursed the whole way, though his voice cracked on every other word. The leader stayed silent, but his eyes never left me, burning with a hatred that promised he'd remember this night forever. Harris came back over, adjusting his hat. We'll take it from here, he said. He hesitated, then gave me a long look. You all right? I nodded. Been through worse. He grunted, glancing at the departing cruisers. Not sure what they thought they were pulling, but it won't be bothering anyone else. Still, he studied me carefully. You handled this cleaner than most folks would have. Quicker, too. I didn't answer. What was there to say? My hands had done this before, half a world away, in towns where no sheriff was coming, where the only law was the one you made yourself. Old habits don't die, they just wait. Harris gave a slow nod, as if he understood what I wasn't saying. He tipped his hat, climbed back into his cruiser, and rolled out, the dust swallowing his taillights one by one until the night returned to silence. I stood on the porch alone, Ranger at my side, staring out at the empty dirt road. The house was quiet behind me, the barn still, the land stretching endless and dark under the stars. A lot of folks might have been shaken by a night like this. But me? I just felt steady. Out here there's no HOA, no neighborhood committee, no board of directors to tell me how to live. There's only the ground under my boots, the sky above my head, and the will to defend what's mine. I scratched Ranger's head, his tail thumping against the porch. He'd earned his rest. So had I, because out here on my land, I don't need an HOA, I am the law.